Hello and welcome to Business at 9. I'm Shabani Gharat. Now, US President Donald Trump has posted on Truth Social, the Islamic Republic of Iran has asked us to continue talks. Now, we have agreed to do so, but the United States has stated to them in no uncertain terms that the ceasefire is over. This comes after the United States launched new airstrikes against Iran, and Tehran responded by targeting US-allied West Asian countries. To discuss this now, we're new developments in the West Asia crisis. We are now joined in by Karan Dutta. He's a geopolitical and capital market strategist. So thank you so much, Mr. Dutta, for joining us today on ET Now. Mr. Dutta, first help us understand, now that the official formal ceasefire is over, can like a diplomatic breakthrough finally be on its way? I know that this is a question that we've been asking again and again over the past couple of months, but do we see some hope, some light at the end of the tunnel finally?
Good evening, Shibani, and thanks for having me on your show today evening. I come from the camp which believes that we're heading towards a peaceful era. However, the journey is fraught with short-term volatility. The reason why I say that is, if you look at the last 30-35 days, there has not been too much action as far as war is concerned. In fact, it's just slowed down. There have been skirmishes, there have been ups and downs, but that's how this process of peace is going to take place. You must remember that there are three parties to this entire war. A lot of focus tends to go on Iran and the United States, but there is the third angle to this, which is Israel. All three put together have reached a stage where the Americans and the Israelis have achieved their war objectives. I think that it's very important for the audiences to understand that the war objectives have been met to a very, very large extent. And the Americans and the Israelis will now struggle to find targets to hit. So there's very little left to hit as well, as far as Iran is concerned. The Iranians, on the other hand, have also suffered, and they're trying to escalate the cost. The economic cost is what they're trying to escalate so that the Americans look weaker. Remember, there's a midterm election coming up. The attempt is to make Trump look weaker, and hence these skirmishes at this point in time. It doesn't take away from the fact that the medium to long-term prospects for peace are much, much higher right now.
And what will be the immediate impact now? This is coming in on, Friday, where, all this week we were discussing that how the official, ceasefire is over, and, there could be both or, as you mentioned, three parties ready to strike at any given point in time. And now suddenly there is again a talk of, like a conversation between the US and Iran. So how do you expect the markets to react, oil markets and markets to react to this?
So, Shivani, every time you notice that there has been, in the last 35, 40 days, if there's been a spike in, let's say, escalation in the war, on that particular day, oil prices have spiked and markets have taken a hit globally, but it hasn't continued. It tends to come back and revert back to mean the next day or the next 2 days later. So it's in the same spirit that we've got to see what is happening now as well. What happened 2 days ago was an escalation on that day, and the next day there were price corrections. Markets were in the red and oil spiked up. But if you notice, day before yesterday, all of that has started to settle down. So the point I'm just trying to make is we've got to take our eye away from what's happening on a day-to-day basis and look at the slightly medium to long-term picture on this one. I come from the school of thought that, like I said, peace is around the corner. More than that, I think you've got to see what is happening through the lens of both Operation Sindoor and Roaring Lion are trying. The attempt is to stop state-sponsored terrorism once and for all. If we are successful in that, if Operation Sindoor was successful in that, and if Roaring Lion is successful in stopping state-sponsored terrorism, can you imagine what an era that means for global peace? And that's
Right,
what
right. Mr. Datta, also I'm curious to know now, Iran had already launched regional strikes this week. Now, Trump's post on Truth Social says that it is Iran who approached them to continue the conversation. So is it again, we are going back to the game of, posterity and, who has the upper hand in these conversations? And what leverage does Iran aim to gain by launching these regional strikes and then reaching out to US for peace talks?
So Shivani, at the same time, is to escalate the economic cost. It's the weaponization of economics out here. And the reason they tend to do that is to kind of escalate the cost of oil. Attacked 3 ships. They ended up attacking Qatari ships and Saudi Arabian ships. And one of the Qatari ships happens to be of a nation which is trying to mediate in the peace talks. And imagine what is happening out here right now, that the Iranians are at war with the Middle East, and the protectors of the Middle East are Israelis and Americans. It's just symbolic of what's happening in the Middle East, that the Israelis and the Americans are protecting Muslim nations while Iran is attacking Muslim nations. So in that sense, the Iranians are also getting isolated further and further. So it doesn't bode well for Iran in the medium to long term. And like I said, that in this particular case, the Americans have also reached a stage where there's very little left to hit. It's almost a 20:1 ratio when it comes to targets. There's a company called Palantir, which has been involved in target setting, etc. And literally, they run out of targets to hit until and unless you start bringing down bridges and civilian infrastructure. That won't really be good for Iran at all. Now, the leverage Iran has, of course, is the Straits, and they've used that leverage as much as they could. Beyond a point, that leverage is actually going to hurt them. As the point I was making, hitting Qatari ships is not going to win friends for them at all.
Right. And, as you rightly pointed out, Iran is attacking the neighbors over here. Now, yes. How do you see the Gulf hosts, who are actually like the mediators, respond to some of, these US bases being attacked on their soil directly by Iran?
I think, Shivani, that's a really relevant question. And we are in 2026. We are in July 2026. The same time next year, in 2027, take a 12-month view out, take an 18-month view out. I think the Middle East would look very different from what it is today. I think this question you've asked is fundamentally the change of the Middle East is starting to happen. And it probably will look much more attuned to the West than it ever has been. And this is not about security, or it's not about who runs the defense. It's not about defense contractors running, security in Middle East. I just think that those countries, their ability to realize that structures that create terrorism need to be dismantled once and for all. And I think in the 12-month, 18-month period out, that will look very, very definitive. And that's what gets me to my point, that I think I'm looking forward to a very peaceful era over the next 18 to 24 months, which basically bodes well for capital markets.
Right. And already we have seen the impact happening with the kind of split that is happening even in the OPEC and OPEC Plus. So with the UAE recently splitting and getting out of the OPEC and OPEC Plus, what do you see will be the larger impact on the oil markets, given, there is no unity even in some of the largest oil producing nations in the world?
Oh, you're absolutely right, Shibani. The UAE coming out of OPEC is not a small step. It's, in fact, quite a big step. It's never happened earlier. There's another interesting piece that is beginning to take place as far as oil is concerned, and we tend to miss that. The Americans have become the largest suppliers of oil. In fact, they're now supplying oil to the extent that is larger than the Russians and the Saudis put together. So if there are some photographs, if you see some satellite photographs of ships that are transiting from the Gulf of Mexico and taking oil out from Gulf of Mexico, which basically means transitioning from the Gulf of Mexico, taking oil from the American coast and then coming out to other nations, it's gone up manyfold. So what is happening is that many nations are starting to come in and step in and become producers of oil to the extent that has never happened in the past. Even for India, we used to have about 21 to 22 nations that used to provide petrol and oil to us. That number has gone up to 41 and 42. So, in fact, we are now the fourth largest refiner of crude oil in the world. So, a lot of those dynamics are beginning to change. And this particular war has set the tone for, like, the point I was making is that the Middle East starts to look very different. But oil dependency and energy security starts looking very, very different 18 months from now.
So much for joining us today on ET Now and sharing your inputs on the latest update on the Trump claims that Trump is claiming to have talks with Iran continue going forward. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me over.